Well, welcome everyone to this first Together LA nonprofit and ministry seminar that we're having. We're calling this series Practical Tools because the conversation that we have today, all of us as ministry leaders and nonprofit leaders have a job to do. We got to grow our organization. We got to use that organization to really be able to engage the city for the gospel. And so for us here at Together LA, we realize no one person, no one church, no one pastor, no marketplace leader could do it alone. We have to serve together. We have to learn to work together in the 144 neighborhoods around Los Angeles. And so as a result, whether it's churches, nonprofits, ministry, marketplace leaders, how do we begin to really be able to serve together and partner together well? And one of those things as nonprofit ministry leaders is, how do we survive during this pandemic? How does that look like in our operations? How does that look like in our communications as board members, as volunteers, even in terms of how we look at our strategy and design our strategy? Because frankly, in this pandemic, our 2-year strategy or 3-year strategy is out the window. We're working on 3 months. Some of us are working on month long. We were just talking offline. Some of us got the PPP loan. It brought us back to things going well for a while, but what happens later on when it doesn't go well? So those are some of the questions that we have that we want to talk about today. And so with that said, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Johanna Tropiano, who is the consulting director at Together LA. And Johanna, can you share just a little bit also what you do, not only for Together LA, but Prison Fellowship full time?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. Thanks to you guys for joining us today on the webinar, and thanks to everyone in the audience for listening in. I'm the consulting director for Together LA, so just helping connect people. That's my favorite thing to do, is connect people for the gospel or the betterment of the flourishing of our city. And then my day job is Director of Strategic Initiatives for Prison Fellowship, which is the largest organization working to combat crime and incarceration in the U.S. And so what I do is I oversee new strategic fundraising strategies for the organization. So it's a lot of fun. We're building out some really new, great ideas that I'm super excited about. So,
well, later on this month, Johanna is going to come back and give a session on peer-to-peer fundraising, something I know she's very, very excited about, something that many of us have zero clue how to work that out. So I'm looking forward to having Johanna back on that one for a more extended session. Michael Mata, Director of Network Engagement, Leadership Development at Together LA. Michael, can you share a little bit about your history and your work here in Los Angeles over the years?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all. My work has really taken a different paths, but it's always been working in the margins or working alongside populations that are marginalized or neglected or ignored in terms of economic and public policies. Currently, I serve on a number of boards, and they're serving, again, that underserved populations. And the issues that they're dealing with could be educational support, career planning, human trafficking, church planting, etc. And they have, to the credit of the leadership of those organizations and the boards, they've been able to at least withstand some of the economic pressures that they're feeling right now that most organizations and businesses are facing at the moment. Unfortunately, because of good planning, a good infrastructure, they've been able to avail themselves of opportunities that have come their way in terms of some of the government support at this moment. But as you already mentioned, it's only a stopgap during this time. I think the challenges they're facing at this moment is how to stay connected to the constituencies they're serving, as well as to continue to support and engage their staff, who are probably mostly all working remotely. So how do you create a sense of community and still have that kind of focus on achieving the mission of the organizations that have been developed and established to serve individuals that, again, are marginalized and sometimes forgotten. And of course, in terms of this pandemic, sometimes highly impacted or disproportionately impacted in terms of their health care. And then, of course, many of them losing their jobs. So it becomes incumbent upon these people serving organizations to continue to do the work. And again, the challenge has been how to make that effective and impactful in the lives of the individuals impacted by the pandemic in terms of their health, in terms of economic challenges, and somewhat being isolated. So how do you establish and continue to affirm and have a sense of community?
Got it. Bill Clark, Chief Advancement Officer at A21. Bill, one of the reasons why we have you on is you've done advancement not only currently with A21, but a tiny little startup many years ago called the International Justice Mission, where you were able to grow it from the ground up. And then you've also worked at Fuller Seminary. And so you've had education, big institutions, startups. And so, Bill, talk a little bit about just what the work of A21 and what you're doing there.
Yep. I joined A21 in 2019. So I oversee revenue, brand, movement building. Just for some context, A21 is an anti-trafficking organization, works in 13 countries. We do everything from stopping human trafficking before it happens, to prevention programs, to rescue people being exploited, and assisting with restoration of survivors. So we work in 13 countries, including the US. And it's great to get back into the fight against human trafficking after the time with IJM. So.
Now we have Mr. Kevin Mo Wong, Executive Director at Solidarity. And so, Kevin, talk a little bit about the work of Solidarity and also a little bit about yourself as well, too.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. I am the Executive Director and the co-founder of Solidarity. We started back in 2002 as just a bunch of wide-eyed, idealistic college students who wanted to live out the teachings of Jesus, but didn't really know how to do it. And slowly, with God's grace, it turned into a full-fledged 501c3 nonprofit. Right now, 18 years into it, we exist to equip under-resourced individuals, families, and communities for community transformation. Most of our population is highly undocumented, gang-influenced neighborhoods in Fullerton, California, out in Orange County.
Got it. And so, Kevin, you pretty much started as a startup and just grew up to where it is right now, right?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Never expected it to get to where it is right now.
Got it. Hey, Michael, let me just start off the question with you. During this time, what are you hearing about from ministries in LA, specifically small to medium-sized ministries? What are some of the challenges that they're facing during this time that you're hearing?
Well, again, as I already mentioned, the challenge is how to keep connected, not to the people they are serving. Not everybody, believe it or not, have access to internet, and so the ability to connect on like Zoom or other platforms is not there. So if you're working with a population that's working after school programs per se, how do you connect with those students? I know that the local school district has attempted to make sure that everybody has access, but that isn't always the case. So how do you connect with those individuals? And some of the organizations have been dependent upon volunteers. And so a lot of those volunteers are retired individuals. And so because of the category, their age, and some of the underlying health conditions that they may be having, they're not able to utilize them as well. So the challenge of managing the operations of the ministry has been probably the most challenging. As I talk to people, what I hear from them, financially, we're in a good place right now. Again, like I mentioned, they've received some federal support, but that's only for a certain season. We can talk more about that and the role of the boards at that time. But it's operations is probably the major challenge, and how to keep going, how to make sure that the mission is being achieved, and letting people know that they're open. They're still, the facility may be closed, but their ministry is very active and engaged.
Johanna.
Great. Kevin, I want to go to you. As you talked about taking your organization from a startup, now it's grown considerably. I guess my question is twofold. Talk through a couple of key decisions you've had to make in that transition, and then also now with the coronavirus in place, what are some key decisions or plans that you are having to sort of anticipate for the future?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you're grassroots and just starting up, there's so much wonder and excitement and everything going on out there. And so everything's a possibility, and your strategy can be so incredibly wide because you don't know exactly what God's fitting you into as an organization or what he's calling you to. So you're trying out all these things. But it seemed like every major financial milestone, whether it's we hit 100,000 or we hit 500,000 or we hit the $1 million mark, our organization considerably had to shift at that point for us to sustain for the future. So that was really interesting trying to lead in that. And for a long time, I was the number 2 at this organization. Tommy Nixon was our founding executive director. So I got a backseat perspective to be able to see how Tommy would lead through these different transitions. And then in 2018 is when I took it over. And we had to change up a ton of things tremendously to be able to look for the long-term sustainability things. As far as the pandemic, that changed everything for us at the organization. Our foundational main way that we equip, one of the main values that we always do is gathering people together. It's been such a huge part of our ethos, and what we feel is one of the best ways for the kingdom to advance forward is through all these really tight-knit relationships. So that had to stop, and we had to move into a virtual space. And then in many of our empowering and equipping programs, we actually had to kind of put a hold on that because there was a greater need in our communities, which is just kind of the relief work. So we switched from an empowering, equipping organization into a relief organization just for this season because that was the greatest demand that our neighbors needed and voiced.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like a lot of organizations are doing that. I know Prison Fellowship has been making that switch as well. I wanted to ask you a follow-up question about the sustainability, talking through your financial sustainability. How have you done that? Can you walk us through a little bit of that?
Yeah. Well, when 2008 hit, we realized we weren't doing really good. We only had one main stream of income, so we diversified that, and we started up a workforce development program. We had a t-shirt screen printing business for a while that was able to supply funding to that way. We went into more grants and foundation work. We also had our bedrock, which is our monthly donors and our private individual donors. But really it was all about diversifying, getting as many different ways to bring in income. Right now, what I'm currently figuring, or the season that we're currently in, is that we have had some very committed longtime donors, but our net has been stretched pretty thin, and we need to go further to new people who have never heard of Solidarity, to people that God has been already speaking this type of lifestyle of ministry into, to ask them to join with us. But my relationships have kind of reached its top. So now we're trying to go into a little bit more email marketing, some kind of things that I never would have thought I ever would have been a part of, as far as like sales funnels and content creation and all that type of stuff, to be able to share the story of what God's doing at Solidarity just a little bit wider than what my network can handle.
Hey, Bill, let me ask you, you've probably been in this situation, especially in the early days of IJM. And so you probably have started out with a founder or someone who tapped into their connections, but after a while you got to grow a network. How do you then start fundraising, try new ideas and communication, but still not branch out too much? Because you probably, as a startup or medium-sized organization, have 2 months, 3 months of operating capital. And so you're always looking at where your cash flow is and fundraising and balancing. How do you manage all that as a leader of an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to emphasize what Kevin was saying, because during 2008, I was leading the fundraising at IJM, and it feels quite similar as the situation we're facing today, in the sense that certain donors have less giving capacity, and because of the uncertainty, certain donors are delaying their decisions about commitments. And so I think it does press into like doubling down on the core things that drive fundraising. This gets to your question, Tommy. So I'd say the 4 drivers of revenue growth for organization, because those other things are out of your control, right? People's capacity going down is out of your control. The uncertainty is out of your control. You have no idea how long this will last. But what's in our control is expanding the relationships, what we're doing with the current relationships, re-engaging past donors that maybe have fallen off our radar, and exploring new revenue streams, as Kevin was talking about. In terms of your specific question, Tommy, I think that I'm a big believer in bullets before cannonballs. And so it's trying low-cost tests to see what they do. And so whether that's you want to expand the relationships and you create an asset, like at H21, we created this parent guide to help parents identify any signs of online exploitation for their children, how to talk to their children. That's a great educational resource. It's also a great way to build relationship with people who are not connected to you, is you get that parent guide out into new networks who are very interested, maybe not even in human trafficking in general, but they're just concerned about their own child. And they want to be equipped. Well, you're going to actually then be able to build a relationship through that asset. So I think that's a very low cost way to expand your network, or finding, I think, practical ways. I think like people do a lot of speaking engagements, but they don't always capture people's information. Well, how are you going to expand that base? And so it's finding really tangible actions people can take. Like we're at IJM, we started leveraging asking folks at speaking engagements to tell their senators and representatives that they care about human trafficking. That was great for our advocacy. It was also a great way for us to build a relationship with tons of people at these speaking engagements. That was probably the main reason why we grew financially, is we just have a larger and larger base.
Yeah.
But doing that advocacy card didn't really cost us anything. We're already going to the event. We're just not maximizing it. So it's looking for those ways of where you're already working or things you're already doing with educational initiatives, whatever it is, and is there a way to leverage that to expand your base of network? And also say, like we've been doing right, at H21 is doing a deep dive in our database. What's every single person that's been connected in the last 11 years? And there's tons of these people we're finding, like, we've been talking to these people for a while. Did we even manage it maybe in the past? We're managing a relationship really well now, but in that time, maybe we didn't have as much contact with folks. And so let's go back and reach out and just say, hey, and you're passionate about human trafficking. We'd like to have coffee and catch up on what we've been doing the last few years. So I think that's a very, it doesn't cost you a lot to do that. I tell you, it's super tedious. I've been in the database. Oh my goodness. But those small things are the things that actually make a difference, to see if you can get new momentum in new areas, or try new revenue streams. Again, maybe that you're doing well with major donors or churches, but you've never applied for a foundation grant. Well, let's explore that. Let's choose those places that maybe the foundations have the most affinity with us and see if we can build those relationships. And so I do think that you can really target your efforts in ways that's not high cost, to expand your relationships, reconnect with people from the past, or pursue new revenue streams.
There's this wisdom that says, you've got everyone you need already in your system if you've been keeping up, and so it's just going back in, like you said, and kind of digging into that. I know at Prison Fellowship we've been doing a lot of that. We did one thing that's happened out of the virus has been a request for Bibles. So typically PF will send 3,000 to 4,000 Bibles out a year. That's about about how many requests we get. Just in the month of April alone, we had over 11,000 requests from incarcerated men and women for Bibles. And so that was one way that we chose to really dig into those people who had not been engaged with us for a while and reach out to them with this sort of new need of getting a Bible in the hand of a prisoner. And we've had some really good success with that and re-engaging. Michael, I want to go to you really quick and just ask you what are some tough questions that organizations need to be asking themselves during this time as it relates to programming or funding? I know you serve on a lot of boards.
Yes.
You guys are asking those tough questions. What are some that we as orgs need to be asking?
Well, one is, are we achieving our mission? Do we have to revisit that mission? Have we really been doing it, or we got caught up on mission drift, doing other things because they were good and maybe they were able to generate some revenue, but they weren't really what we were about at the beginning. And certainly the landscape had changed, so there's going to have to be some rethinking about the role and place of the organization in working with the population that it's targeted, or coming alongside of. I think that's going to be important, how to right side themselves and recalibrate in order to be effective and go for the long haul in terms of some of the issues that we're dealing with. So those are some really tough questions that do we have to rethink and reconceive on how we operate and what we do. And that made some hard decisions about staffing. And also, what kind of leadership do we need moving forward? Having gone through this, some of us survived the 2008 recession. That helped us, become leaner in some ways, but more effective and stronger in other areas. But now we're in another similar place, but different kinds of things, because the uncertainty, as Bill has mentioned, is significant. So how do we live into that? Strategic planning may not be helpful. Maybe we have to find some other tools to do that. Scenario plannings have been helpful in other ways. So it makes some hard decisions of maybe operating in a different way. And it may need, again, to change the character, the profile of the staffing, the operations, and then, of course, maybe seeking the tough question of how do we continue to serve the community that we've been called to? How do we involve them in the process of this? Too often, we come in with a lot of good ideas and I think good strategies, but not always involving the people that we are serving. So how do we make that happen in a legitimate way, a respectful way, one that really affirms the dignity of the people we're serving so that they're part of it? And sometimes some organizations have not been set up to do that. They're there to serve, but not necessarily in a way that really welcomes the people at the table of the making decisions.
Got it. Hey, Kevin, let me ask you a quick question. There was one thing you said early on that caught my attention. Your organization wasn't exactly set up for a long-term success, and you guys had to pivot a little bit. And so for you, how do you tangibly make that decision? As a small organization or medium-sized organization, like for instance, A21 or Prison Fellowship, you will hire a consultant, you will work with your team, everything like that. Sometimes it's just you and a couple other people. And you're sitting there, there's like 5 different options. Which one do I go with? Because you've never been there before. How do you tangibly figure out the decisions? How do you look at your options? Who do you talk to? Can you talk with us a little bit about that process? Because I bet you a lot of people are in that same position.
Yeah, and this is probably where I'm super weak at, because I am always looking at all the different options and want to weigh the perfect option to be able to take. And I think in my case, in my leadership, what I've grown in is realizing that I have a really good staff and really good board around me that have been able to support me and will push through these decisions with me, no matter what decision we end up making. But for the most part, it's always, in my arena, it's always consensus, is trying to ask people who have done it before me. It's reaching out to my partner organizations, people, even here, like if I have to reach out to somebody who's done this before, who's been sitting on a ton of boards, I'd hit up Michael and be like, Michael, how do you handle this type of thing? And getting as much input as I can, and then coming up to a collective decision amongst my board and my staff to be able to say, this is the way that we're going to go forward. This is what we decided. Now let's put all of our energy into that, and let's make sure that we just kind of attack it the best way that we can.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, how would you comment on it? Because sometimes you're sitting there and you just don't know, because you've never done this before. Like even COVID-19, no one has ever been in this situation before. So if I take this step and it doesn't work, I now have compromised my organization, my cash flow, everything like that. But then I talk with our team. There's 5 different opinions. How do you navigate through all that?
That's a great question. I think some things I look for is there a way to build on the strengths you have as an organization as you consider new innovations? So you're not doing something from scratch. We have at A21, we do that in the fall that is large numbers of people gathering together. Well, that may be possible in some countries and won't be possible in others, and you won't even know till you get there. So we've actually are redesigning the event. We have announced we're redesigning the event that will allow people to participate regardless of the social distancing requirements for that country. And yet we're going to try to leverage our strengths in doing the event, which is massively engaging volunteers, having people host, have ownership for it. So we're trying to do that balance between which ideas play to our strengths and yet which ideas are resilient for what the future holds. So those ideas, the ones that do both those things together, build on our strengths and have the most resilience, are the ones that are going to win the day in the conversation. So we're not going to just drop the event that's been very, very successful on a global scale. We're going to take those key things and just do it like a kind of reposition what we're doing, but we're going to build on that momentum. So that's a bit of how we would evaluate those type of decisions.
I want to talk through a little bit more of that, and this is a question for anybody. Are you guys seeing, like at Prison Fellowship, for example, I have been blown away by the innovation. I would not have typically defined Prison Fellowship as extremely innovative coming into the organization, but the response to coronavirus and the ways that Prison Fellowship has been able to pivot with not just bringing in new streams of revenue, but also in the ways that we're continuing to serve incarcerated men and women, and also our Angel Tree families and our volunteers. We have 11,000 volunteers, has just been absolutely phenomenal. With you guys, and so the response of leadership, I think, and the response of our directors has been really like where there were maybe some silos or whatever, coronavirus has completely erased all of that. And I've just been blown away in the ways that we've come together as an organization and as sort of one team to move through this. Have you guys seen that? I mean, I feel like this is something that will really pull out. It really will show the people who are not really on the boat versus the ones who really are and want to just go for it. Are you guys seeing that in your organizations at all? And how, if not, how are you navigating sort of the ones that are saying, I don't know, or let's hold back, or, what are you guys seeing?
Michael, love your thoughts on it first.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting right now on some of the boards I've been on, organizations and which boards I serve. And, just echoing what Kevin and Bill have already articulated, going on with your strengths and your relationships and becoming more nimble in terms of the context, right? And so they're utilizing the platforms they've underutilized in the past. Like, they're now more visible online than ever before. I'm very surprised that I get this link. I never seen them before there, and they're talking about what they're doing and relating to other issues that people may not think about it. Like today or the last 2 days, recognizing this is Memorial Weekend and who our people are that served and the like, and then also occasionally, varying and lifting up the frontline workers that are keeping us safe and healthy. And so they're creating the internet has allowed them to create more presence than ever before, going even beyond the constituency they served or their donors, but showing, as I think Bill just articulated, some of the strength and sharing it with the larger public. And that way saying that we are a resource too. We're knowledgeable and we're doing what we said we're doing, but we're also connecting with other initiatives and promoting them as well. So that's been really helpful for people to get out of their cocoon, their little silos, and see themselves as part of the larger landscape of bringing health in different ways.
And maybe to your point, question, Johanna, I would say we've also seen that at A21. But I think it's also, for my experience, A21 and other organizations, it's a bit about how you go about making decisions. Like, we've had so many calls with stakeholders. It's a little bit like, I think what people have, when this goes well, they've understood you first have to get your team aligned and on board and excited. If that doesn't happen, then it doesn't matter what you do outside. So I think it does create these challenges, create a chance to rethink the future, but it's the way you go about executing that feels inclusive to your teams, lets them a chance to hear ideas, sort out what's the best. I've been on so many, because we have global teams, so many 5 a.m. calls just to be with every key stakeholder, because I know if they own it, then they're going to lead their people and their countries through it. And if they don't, it's not going to happen. So your point, yeah, I think the possibility is there, but I do think it sounds like you have great leadership at Prison Fellowship. It does require that sort of alignment building internally to make the most of it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything that Michael and Bill both said. I think especially in this time with COVID coming around, it seems like there's just been a burst of creativity because people are always thinking of how can we change and how can we modify and how can we pivot things to be able to make our programs more effective. So that's brought in a lot more buy-in for our staff. But the bigger thing that I think I've seen citywide for us in our organization is a lot more collaboration. There's been so much willingness for organizations to work together for a greater good right now, which has been really inspiring and fun to be a part of.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Speaking of morale and sort of that consensus building, I would love to know from you guys as leaders, how are you going about building up your team's morale? How are you encouraging them during this time? Because I know a lot of us, we're not used to being at home with our kids and working, many of my colleagues are used to being in the prisons all day and now they're stuck at home. How are you building up that morale and encouraging work-life balance and home-life balance, bills, finances, all that good stuff? It's for anyone.
Well, just checking in. I mean, people are sometimes pleasantly surprised that someone actually asks them how they're doing, right? Just that simple question, how's it going? And to let people know they're not alone, that there's someone's concerned about their well-being as well, not just as an employee or a staff member, but as an individual, that has, responsibilities at home or dealing with the kind of issues that maybe parents have to deal with having their children there, 24/7. And so those very, low key, but hey, how you're doing has been very helpful. And I've seen that our executive directors have been doing that as well even checking in with the board members. How are you? You're really been important to the stability of our organization. What can we do to support you as well? So that's been the camaraderie, that family, that really connection between, staff and the people who are at the front lines of the organization.
Yeah, and a few thoughts for me building on that is, one, I think it's important to be transparent as a leader. So I think it helps my team. I think my team, they're all working easily. It's just so easy to get up when you would commute and just work until later, then you would even leave. So people are working so many more hours. So just being transparent to say, hey, on the weekends, I need to unplug. I don't know about you, or I won't have anything to offer the next week. So I don't know about you, but I'm probably working too many hours and I'm going to unplug. It's just helpful to be honest with them about your own circumstances. It gives them the freedom to be honest. And then I think the other thing I would say is I think different people need different things and not to play the same thing. I think some folks, because of this situation, their roles are less clear. So having more touch points to help bring that clarity. Other folks, it doesn't change their job at all. So they don't want those 50 extra meetings, and so what do they need? They need you to move something for they can do in the organization. They want you to help coach them through a strategy session or something. And so I do think it's a little bit of personalization. Morale, I think, works best when people feel like you see them and you meet what their unique needs are. And so I think that's been very effective. So,
yeah. Hey, Kevin, actually, let me ask you because a lot of times let me ask you, how many staff do you have over at Solidarity?
We have 8.
8 staff. What's your advice? We've talked about staff, they're working hard, but what about underperforming staff or staff that now has to deal with home issues, work from home, kid issues, everything like that? The work is slipping. How do you navigate that? How do you still make sure that you're sensitive to that, but still get the work done?
Yeah, that is a very pertinent question, because that's exactly what we're dealing with at Solidarity. And so we have staff that are juggling this work-based life and at home, and it's been a struggle for them. It's been hard. And so trying to find that fine line between having enough sympathy and compassion and grace to be like, okay, I get that, it's really hard, but then also pushing them. And it goes back to what Bill was saying, is really knowing my staff and knowing what things are triggers for them and what things are motivators for them, and really trying my best to land on those motivators. And so for a lot of us, it's been trying to find something, a shift in their job descriptions that will still fulfill our mission, but it wasn't what they were doing before, but allowing them and releasing them to kind of have the leadership to be able to try this new thing out in a brand new sort of way.
Got it. All right, Michael, Bill, Kevin, all right, Johanna, even you. Let me ask you, because Johanna, you did a startup as well too. Here is a tough question. We're talking about practical tips, right? You've gotten the PPP loan. You're a donor. You probably have 2 or 3 months of cash flow. Things are looking good now until June, July. Come August, things are going to struggle. Some of your donors or foundation says, hey, we won't be able to help you. Who do you decide who to let go? Do you have tiers? Do you have option 1? Do you have option 2? Do you have option 3? What decisions do you have to ask? What questions do you have to ask in your mind in preparation? Because if you wait to 3 months from now, you're in trouble. So you always have to have contingent plan. How do you navigate? Bill, Michael, Kevin, Johanna, I'm going to ask you as well too. How do you navigate that?
I think it's pretty important to, as a leader, to really set clear expectations for performance, and so, you know, historically looking back, you can typically know historically whether someone is consistently meeting those expectations and what their morale is and how excited they are about the job or the energy they're kind of bringing to the team. And so when it does come time to making those tough decisions, you have hopefully some historical data that you can pull from to reinforce whatever tough decision it is that you have to make. That's
now
where I go initially.
Bill, let me ask you, what if it's not job performance, everyone's doing a good job, you just don't have control?
Right. I think it's 2 things. One is, we have high performing teams. I would first look to, drop anything off of that ship that's not personnel, because it's hard to find great people. And so I would look to reduce anything I could that's not the people first and foremost. But if it wasn't that boat, and been in that boat in other organizations and other seasons, at Fuller, we had very significant right sizing of the organization. I think you got to look at it in 2 different ways. One, you got to put the people aside and look at what's the structure and the roles that you need, and even how you would actually execute that. Maybe some of these roles could be actually outsourced as contractors, some of them could be part-time. So that's one view of it. And then you look at who are the people who are the biggest contributors, and then you try to reconcile those things. So sometimes it's like, we don't need that role anymore, but I don't want to keep that person who's in this role because they're one of the best contributors. So I think you have to look at it both pieces separately. What are the structure and the roles that are most important and the avenues to do it, and then who are the best, most high performing people in your team, and then how do you keep as many of those people as you can. But I also would say that it is, if something's not working out with an employee, I've also found that you should also be just forthright, and when you get to that place where we did this Fuller of just saying we have to right size the institution for the enrollment of today, just to be straightforward, and that it's not about their performance, and it's just a reality of what's best for the mission. Yeah. So I'd be cautious to let go great people, but ultimately you have to do what's best for the mission.
Yeah, I think it's that element of transparency that Bill already mentioned earlier on, that it's so important if you're really a mission-oriented driven organization, that people know what the situation is and people will understand and appreciate it, and that some decisions are going to be hard, to make. I know some organizations that I've been affiliated with have tried to do the just thing, as if they might ask not so much the volunteers, but if this is the process we're going to do, those that need to let go or will step up, this is your package. This is what we can compensate you for this time as you're leaving, as you're moving on. I remember one of the organizations and where my position was cut, given these situations, not that I was underperforming, I really moved them into a new arena, but I was there for a certain period. It was longer than I was expected. They actually gave me a job coach if I wanted available, right? That was amazing, and they worked through. And so that was interesting to go through that aspect of it, that here's a caring organization that understands, the people that they had invested in, have brought in, and they're going to help them, move on to the next, phase of their lives. So it's not just thank you very much, here's a pig slip. But I think, those are really important. If they all know that as part of the HR process, then I think people will more often than not understand the hard decisions and accept them, that they just weren't cut, and without, any explanation, without any care about their situation, but trying to make that happen. I know not all organizations are set up that way, but at least the transparency, trying to do the just thing, understanding that this is all part of us, and that no one is going to be ignored for their contribution, but we're going to try to make the best of this situation moving forward. And I feel like that's really important. So it's good to have HR policies in place ahead of time before you get to that situation, so that everybody knows how things will play themselves out.
Yeah, for us, we have had to ask this question a ton of times, and we go through all of our programs and ask which ones are the ones that align the best with the mission, that is really fulfilling the mission. And then on the other side of that, since we are a community development organization, we start to look through all of our programs to see which ones have we been getting in the way of our constituents or our neighborhoods actually fulfilling. Can we move out of the way of an after-school program and allow the neighbors to come in and actually lead that and fulfill our mission in the long run? So when things get tough and we have to make massive budget cuts, are we going to be able to cut the things that the neighborhood's going to be able to provide for themselves and actually really fulfill the mission in the long run?
Yeah, that's awesome. With any of the changes y'all have made in light of the pandemic, do you see yourself keeping any of these online strategies that you're using, or do you see your ministry changing, organization changing now, with all the pivots? Is that going to change maybe your strategy completely moving forward, even as things get back to normal? Bill, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, definitely. It's no doubt that there will be innovations that we keep. We've been doing Zoom calls with donors, which has been fun. I don't think they would actually have been open to it if we weren't in the all stuck at home. It'd been an odd request, like, why don't you come visit me? But if you imagine where you work across the U.S., we can't make it out everywhere as often as you want to. So you still want to see people face to face, but it's nice to be able to mix in this new normal called Zoom. And so that's really fun. I think we're planning to do things a little more because of mass gatherings, a little bit of mobilizing more networks of people in their own, where are all the different networks that we could engage, whether it's an organization or a business, if it's a church or a school or a network of friends or a group of business owners or whatever it is. Is there a way to engage those networks? Because people aren't able to gather, say, for large events. I think we'll keep that strategy. I think we'll go deeper in kind of infecting networks with the mission, and then leading that to larger events in the future when we can do those things. But I think we'll gain some skills and network engagement that we'll definitely keep. So yeah, definitely things we're learning in this, and new muscles that will benefit us for the future. So
yes.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree that this time has kind of upped the game on many people that maybe have not been as comfortable with online engagement, and it will have impact in one way to re-examine what are strategic meetings that need to happen, and how we're going to have them, and perhaps even lessen the impact on the budget in terms of travel costs, in terms of those kinds of things that happen that you need to include, and sometimes it can be very costly. And then those that are very, environmentally concerned, that we would lessen our carbon footprint by not sending people all over the place for meetings, and then they can come back and report. But we can actually have an instant report with these types of platforms. So I think there's going to be a lot of rethinking what is needed, what was no longer an essential face-to-face meeting, or even become more intentional when we do have a face-to-face meeting, what needs to happen truly, and to make sure that it is has the kind of effectiveness and impact that we expect from that kind of a meeting.
Mhm.
So I think in that regard, there's somebody rethinking of how do we operate and still be effective.
Mhm. Kevin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's going
Hey,
off
Kevin,
of what,
Bill,
Go ahead, Kevin.
okay, going off of what Michael said. I think one of the
yeah,
that
sorry.
we're going to be able to learn is in this virtual space, connection is so important. And so you're starting to develop new skills on how to connect with people by staring into a webcam all the time. That when we take this into a place where we can actually physically gather again, I'm expecting that our programs are going to become even more robust because there's been all these skills that have been strengthened during this COVID season that are going to be very applicable for when we get to gather again.
One cool thing I'll say at PF is that it's been a much easier to connect our donors with our leaders who are on the ground during this season. I think back to my time at IJM, and it was so hard to make that connection from donors to the work that's being done in Cambodia, for example. But right now, with everyone being stuck at home and being virtual, and people aren't, our field directors aren't in the prisons right now. So they are doing Zoom calls with our donors and letting them in on what's going on. So I've been having my Arizona field director do Zoom calls with all my Arizona donors and talking about the impact that their donations are specifically having, on programming in Arizona. And that has been something that's been really awesome too. Tommy, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hey, Bill, Kevin, let me ask you a quick question. Is donor development, as you guys talk with donor, is this a good time to ask for an increase in donation? Is this a good time to ask? What's your advice for some of those guys that are trying to figure out how to approach donors during this time? Or do you even not say anything knowing that everyone knows that you need money? Kevin, love your thoughts on it first.
This whole season is all about developing a deeper trust with my donors and my major donors, so that when I have to ask them, when the PPP runs out, that I'm going to be able to have some validity to actually ask them things. So they need to know that Solidarity is still doing work and that it's still necessary during this season. But at the same time, as Michael was pointing out earlier, I'm really trying to see how their family's doing, seeing if they need any extra prayer or support any way the organization can, so that when it comes to the point of when I'm going to have to make these bigger and larger asks, that they are received with more relational trust.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would say that's I feel very similarly. And I think the thing is everyone's in a different circumstances, not to assume.
Yeah.
Like some people are very financially impacted, major donors. Some are not at all. Some people are probably increasing their wealth in this time. So it's not everybody's the same. So being in relationship with them gives you that insight. I think there's also ways to find that out by saying, hey, we're going to create a match to inspire mass giving for mass donors. Are you interested in participating? It doesn't even feel like an ask. It just feels like an opportunity. And so, but they're like, oh, I'd love to do that. That sounds very leveraged. Or oh, we're not able to do that right now because things have changed for us. Oh, okay. It just gives you a chance to so sometimes opportunities gives you a chance of just seeing where they're actually even at. I think the other thing too is I think fundraising is very mental. Inside the minds of those raising money, these donors are not doing us a favor. We're inviting them into great meaning in their lives. So it's a huge, it's a gift to invite people to give. Now, I'm completely agree that we should be sensitive to where people's circumstances are. And I think for the most part, what we're doing is just keeping people updated what we're doing and deepening that relationship. But when the opportunity does arise, I also just think that this season of crisis makes people also more empathetic. It makes them more compassionate to people in need.
Exactly.
And I would encourage people to be bold in asking, sensitive and bold. I know those are a tricky thing to balance, but I think the people who can, okay, that person is really not a place to ask. The person is, and I'm going to be bold. And really get them to understand, not everyone's lockdown experience is the same. right? Like, and we have a chance to make a difference. And people are longing for meaning. They're looking for ways to make a difference in the crisis. And we're the opportunity, all of us and other nonprofits, the opportunity for them to step into that. So it's a balance between sensitivity and boldness.
Bill, I remember, I think I learned it from you, actually. Everybody, Bill was my boss at IJM, one of my bosses. But I learned from you, and this has become, for major donors, for me, like just sort of pivotal in how I do fundraising. And it's, what do we want for our donors before we ask anything from them?
Mm-hmm.
And really understanding that question of like, how can we meet their need, and digging down to what it is and what their core need is. And that's really about building that relationship. And if I have set that question at the forefront of my relationship with my donors, then I know automatically this donor's struggling. I just need to love them through this right now. Mm-hmm. Send them whatever might be encouraging to them. Like you said, this donor is doing really well, and he's open or she's open to doing something bigger or better. And that giving out of that is going to do something for them, but it's always just sort of having that mindset of what can I do for my donors before I ask anything from them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the environment is, as already built, people really want to make a difference in people's lives, and sometimes they're struggling too, but they're in a better place than someone else. And so I think the example, what we see now is crowdfunding. People say this individual needs help, and then they raise $100,000 in a few days, or $400,000. Just an incredible response. It may be a one time, but nonetheless, at least it tells you people really do want to make a difference. They do care. They want a vehicle by which they can do that, and if they can trust you, they will do that. And with us being more present in virtual space, stumbled upon through Instagram or Twitter or what have you, they'll hashtag this and they'll find you, and they might only be able to get $25 this time, but then you develop that relationship with them, and so at a given time they might be able to give more, but they know that you are making a difference, and that's important. So people are finding each other, and so I agree that we need to be bold, put it out there, and people respond according to what they can, but more importantly, what's in their heart and what they want to do.
Yeah. Hey, in the last few minutes that we have left, we've gotten a couple questions on boards. One person commented, hey, you got to have a strong board. All right, that's great. Let me ask you guys a question. All of you guys have been on boards. All four of you guys are either on boards or part of a board. What constitutes a strong board? Do you find people who are different than you, who challenge you? Do you find people who are similar to you? What constitutes a strong board for you guys?
It's a great question, and I'll jump in because I seem to be the professional board member here, and the number of boards I'm part of. And it all depends too, because where it is in the evolution of the organization. Probably at the very start, you need a board that can roll up their sleeves and are working. They're actually volunteering, not only just giving, but they're really engaged in the operations or helping shape the operations and developing the policies that will govern that particular organization as it grows. And there'll be another time when you need kind of the expertise on kind of the what is the know-how, and what are the policies and structures that need to be in place, and how do they operate, that they will then give insight and direction to the executive director or the president of the organization and ministry. And then it comes a point where you need elements of people that can have access to wealth or know how to generate wealth. So it really depends where you are as an organization as you're growing, but definitely people are committed. And all foundations ask, do you have 100% support of your board? And what that means is, are they all giving? And that may not be that everybody can give at the same level. Some boards require a certain level coming in. You can't be part of this unless you generate X number of dollars, give or get. But as long as some other organizations I've been on, we had board members that they're part of the community we're serving, and maybe $50 a year was it. I mean, that was a stretch really beyond what they could give. That still counts towards 100% giving and support. So that's just an overview that it depends where you are as the organization, but absolutely a board that's committed, that's engaged, that's also giving their time and effort, and is also standing behind the executive director and ensuring that she or he can do the work that needs to happen to achieve the mission of the organization.
Hey, Kevin, you mentioned. Oh, Kevin, you mentioned when you started Solidarity, it was brand new. It was starting college. When your first board, was it just your friends? Did you have to pivot and transition through all that?
Yeah, yeah. It was just like, hey, I need you. Can you help me out here? And that's how we really started. It was Tommy getting all his friends to be able to be a part of it, and then slowly we've had to hand select different roles that we needed. And just to add to what Michael was saying, I think one of the strengths, though, one of the aspects that make up a really strong board, especially in this season, are people who have an ability to be generative thinkers, the ideators that will be asking the questions that I can't ask because my head is too focused in on the day-to-day stuff, but they're thinking about the questions of the organization that are beyond what I can be thinking of right now. So those type of people, to identify people who kind of have that futuristic thinking, that desire to look at it in a way that we can't look at it. So somebody who will push back on things. That's been very helpful in this season specifically for me.
That's good. Very good.
Hey, Bill, actually, let me, before we wrap up, let me ask you one specific question on the board. And here's a sensitive question. Your executive director, your president, all of that stuff. As a board, at what point do you decide that you need to make a change? For some of the people who are listening on there, they're on boards or they're part of board. How do you know when it's time to make a change in leadership?
Yeah, I would say it's a great question. It is the number one responsibility of boards, right? They're the only person that can hire and fire that executive director. So I think sometimes it goes both ways. You know, sometimes boards can be too quick to act and not give enough time or support. Are they supporting the executive director? But I think often the times it's more clear to the organization that the leader isn't working and the board is too slow to act. So I think if the board is finding ways to hear from management, whether it's including them in the board meetings or looking at some surveys to really identify, are there signs that the leader maybe even be a great person, but doesn't have the right skill set for this time in this place, or had it for another time, but doesn't anymore? So I think it's on the board's sort of responsibility to get a pulse for the organization, because I think people don't leave organizations, they leave leaders. So if there's a real attrition of really high quality people, that's a pretty big sign that probably you don't have the right leader of the organization. And so my frustration at times is I think boards move much too slow in evaluating the question of whether this is the right person for the right time. So
yeah, I think it's a great insight there. You know, when's the right time, but how do we evaluate? And so it's going to be imperative that the board set up certain kinds of assessments and yearly annual evaluations just to keep in contact. Not only we're having problems with the executive, but maybe how can we help the executive, you know, strengthen their abilities in areas that we think that they have potential in. But you can only so much invest in potential. You really need to see action and abilities. And more often than not, at least an example, an experience I had, we came to an understanding. Yeah, this is a good time to move. So succession planning is essential. A lot of nonprofits don't always do that, especially when their founder director has been there for 25 years, and you know, maybe they might be there another couple of years. But what do we do when they're not there? And so I think this pandemic has helped us to rethink in terms of what do we do? What's the next plan? What's the contingency plan? But it's also to do that with the executive director. You never know what may happen. God forbid that, you know, if their time is called to go up yonder. But it's also a time when we need to really be prepared that there might be plucked by because they're so good for us, and then somebody wants them. And so can we share them? But how do we plan to keep going when we don't have that executive director? So I just came out of one organization that went through that. And so we finally landed on somebody that we all feel really comfortable at, but it was a good process and transparency with our constituency. This is what's going on. This is where we're going. This is where we're happening, you know, and we're looking for, you know, a fresh perspective on that. And then to Kevin's comment, yes, we need people who also can think outside the box, or millennials say, think without a box. right? And so how do we look at what are possibilities that maybe because of the executive directors, day in, day out operations, not free to think out and, come up with some other ideas to really, again, around articulating and incarnating the mission.
Yeah. Last final thought for all of you guys, including Johanna. We want to talk about practical tools, practical tips. In your area of expertise, what's one realistic practical tip you will offer up to those listening right now? I would love to hear from each one of you. Bill, I'm going to start with you.
I'd say practically assume there's an abundance and not a scarcity. God is a God of abundance. I would say Americans last year spent $500 million on their pets for Halloween costumes. So I'll just say, even with the pandemic in the United States, there's a lot of disposable income. And so it might mean you need to reach out to more people. But I just want to say there is an abundance because we have a God who's a God of abundance, and also because there's just an amazing amount of resources to meet the need. So
Bill, why you got to call me out in public? I bought my Halloween costume.
Kevin, thoughts?
Yeah, for me, it would be to seriously invest in either a spiritual director or some therapy and counseling to be able to soul search, like what are the motivations that are coming out of you as a leader? What is provoking you to be the person that you are and to make the decisions that you are? They always say the health of organization is only going to be going as strong as a leader is. And if that leader is doing things out of a false identity or trying to lead in a way that is just promoting themselves, then everything's going to crumble. And we've seen that happen over and over and over. So one of the huge things is finding either a spiritual director or go into therapy just to be able to get somebody else, again, to give you some voice into how you're living your life.
Thank you, Kevin.
Right.
Michael?
Yes, those are good ones. One is technology is not the solution, right? So don't, bet that now that we're all kind of more comfortable with utilizing and being on virtual space, that's going to solve everything. We still need to do the hard work of planning. Maybe it's a 30-day, 60, 90-day, beyond. And everyone needs to be part of that. Don't just blame it on the executive. It's the board. And I would encourage also inviting those that you serve, the beneficiaries, the ones who benefit from the efforts you do, to be part of that as well. Because they may come up with some perspective that you don't necessarily think because you're thinking organizationally, but they're the ones that are receiving the abundance that God is sharing through you. And so I would encourage also including them in the planning as you move forward.
Yeah.
And
Johanna, wrap this up.
they're all so good. Y'all have stolen all of mine. I think there's no donation too small right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's where I go. And I think immediately of one of my colleagues, we did this really fun Facebook fundraiser. It cost us nothing on Giving Tuesday. Now we raised $75,000 in a day. And one of my colleagues had this great little strategy where she was asking her friends to Venmo her. She'd put up a $20 little bingo card, and she would put $1 here, $5 here, $1 here, $3 here. And she was asking her Gen Z friends to donate, and she raised over the course of the day, $500 that way. And that contributed to $75,000 over the course of the day. So for me, there is no donation too small. I think sometimes we can snub our noses at that. But God reminds us of the power of those might. So that's
Amen.
Well, thank you. And Johanna, this summarizes, we have four unique people, mostly in organizations, startups, bigger organization, board members, volunteers, all of that stuff, but we're all in it together. We're all doing this together in partnership. We're trading ideas. We're trying to balance and bounce ideas off of each other, supporting each other. And I hope that is what the vision of Together LA is like. We'll have more opportunities for us to do all these things.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for inviting us.
All right, God bless.
Thank you. We'll send you more information in terms of actually concrete tools. We'll talk about innovation. We'll spend some time talking about peer-to-peer fundraising. We'll talk about communication. So, Bill, Michael, Kevin, Johanna, thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for watching.
Right, bye-bye.
Thank you. For more information on Together LA, go to TogetherLA.net or Instagram at Together_LA. That is TogetherLA.net or Together_LA. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.